Hello everyone and welcome back to another movie review. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Favorite, which is the latest Yorgos Lanthimos movie. I reviewed The Lobster, one of my first reviews, somewhere around 10 or 15. So it was a while ago, but I really enjoyed that and it set my expectations high for this and it really delivered. So let's do a little story summary. So the story of The Favorite follows a sort of young woman named Abigail who is showing up at the castle of the Queen Anne Morley, I think her name is. They usually just call her the Queen or Anne, so I just wrote down the extra last name for context. She shows up at the palace of the Queen and is asking for a job. The assistant, sort of, right-hand woman of the Queen, her number one, is Abigail's cousin, Sarah. I saw this a few hours ago, so I had to write down the names. Sarah Marlborough, and she asks her cousin for a job, and she becomes a servant. And throughout the course of the movie, she becomes closer to the Queen as she shows that she's really quite just a generous person. She's always helping out and things like that. And the Queen takes a liking to her too, and they become friends. And the entire movie focuses around the idea that these three characters have a triangle of friendship, but also of love, because there's sexual connotation between almost all of them, and also hatred because each of them has their doubts about each other and their mistrust and the battle for power between all of them. And it's really quite a great movie, and especially because the number one focus of the movie you start to think is Abigail's journey, but it turns out that it's really their relationship. It's focused more on the dynamic between the three of them rather than one of the characters specifically. So I'm gonna start with the good and end with the bad here. There's only one bad thing, but that is quite obnoxious and is what kept this movie from a perfect score. Throughout the entire movie, I was thinking, wow, there really aren't very many flaws with this, because it was well paced, it was well shot, which I'll get into. Great characters, as I said, which I'll get into more. But overall, a great movie. First off, the first thing you'll notice, especially in the first few scenes, because it's a little bit jarring at first, is how much artistic intent each shot has. They do a lot of weird things. They use a lot of fisheye lenses, which is an interesting choice, and shows up twice or so a scene, and it's a lot, but it doesn't really take away or add anything, but it has artistic intent, and maybe that's just something I'm missing, but it's definitely interesting. They also use slow-mo with dramatic orchestra music in the background, which they also had in The Lobster, and I'm sure in some of Yorgos' other movies. But those are interesting. There's lots of shots that are just intended for you to experience incredible lighting, because there's a lot of great moments where, because this takes place in the Victorian era, there's no electricity, so it's either all candlelit, which there's a lot of beautiful candlelit nighttime scenes indoors, or natural light drifting down through cracks in windows high above with shadows casting, and it is really amazing, especially because as someone who I don't really like Victorian era, just the vibe it gives off. I'm not a huge medieval fan, especially the costume or the dresses that they wore and the wigs and that kind of thing, and it doesn't really click with me. As you can tell, I'm pretty simple in terms of my decoration. So, or what's the word I'm thinking of? Intricate or ordinate. That's not the word. Ornate, gold things on the walls and lots of flowers and things like that don't really click with me. But because of how well this was shot, it really stood out to me and also felt really natural, so I did not mind it at all, which is a plus because, as I said, I'm not really one who usually enjoys that. They also use a lot of whip pans. It would go straight from one character to another, or even like a 180 whip pan, which is really interesting and kept conversations that would have been pretty mundane, especially because there's a subplot that's about a war that's going on between England and France. It kept those mundane political conversations a little more entertaining, because it would whip up to someone's face and then over to another person and 180 around to someone else they were talking to, and it kept it really fun and fast-paced. Another thing about the design of this movie and the tone overall is the way I was thinking about it throughout the entire film was elegant with a touch of insanity, and that is what I kind of want the tagline for this video to be. I don't know, maybe I'll put it in the description. But the movie really is elegant. I just talked about the set design, the costumes, things like that are all so well made and fit the time period so well that it's so natural. And as well as just some nature shots of, they have sort of a garden labyrinth in the palace, which is cool, and some shots in the forest with horses and things like that. Those are all really elegant, but there's always a tone in the background, which you'll know if you saw The Lobster, and I assume Yorgos' other movies are like this, is that there's always something a little bit weird. Every character is sort of off their rocker in some way. There's just there's scenes where they dance like really weird, and I did not expect that, because usually I think of Victorian era dances in a certain way, but they definitely blew that out of the water. They also, the queen, I forgot to mention, is sort of sickly and also kind of not sure of herself. She's not very confident. So she is in a wheelchair for a lot of the movie, and I came up with this idea. I call it a wheel throne, because it really was the wheelchair that she had, at least one of them, was very ornate and looked like a high back throne chair, but just happened to have wheels on it, which was something I didn't expect to see from that kind of movie. And also, they use a lot of secret passageways and things like that. So there's a little bit off, something a little bit off from what you expect the era to be, and it makes a very coherent and interesting world that doesn't quite fit into the other movies that are in this time period or genre. Also, this movie uses a chapter structure, which I thought was nice. It kept the pace going and would end sort of the chapters, the set of scenes that make up that chapter would have a pretty nice ending and nice beginning for the next one, especially because each chapter was a Roman numeral and then a title card, sort of, which would be one of the most important lines from that upcoming chapter. And I really enjoyed that. As you probably know if you've seen my other reviews, I like pacing a lot. I like it when you can tell how much time is happening between each thing, and I enjoyed that. And then finally, I just want to talk about the biggest point of the movie, which obviously is the characters, as I said earlier, and their relationship between all of them. You start off the movie thinking that Abigail is the protagonist, and that Sarah's kind of this shady character. But throughout the movie and throughout each scene, really, your perspective on each character changes as more things are revealed about them, as more development is given to them, as more details about their past or their relationships to each other in the past, and it really kept me on my toes. And that was another great thing about keeping me from complaining about the Victorian era setting, was that I was so engaged with the characters and their relationships, and they had their sexual tension, they had their hatred for each other or their mistrust, and it really kept me focused. And even though it kind of felt like a long movie, even though it's just over 2 hours, it kept me engaged enough throughout and kept me on my toes with the different changes between all the characters, or each perspective of the characters, that it was just really fun. Final thing, this is the only negative, but the ending sucks. It really does. The last 5 minutes, I don't know if I spoil it or not, but I'm sorry, the ending is so disappointing. It doesn't wrap up any of the characters' arcs. It's not satisfying. There's no resolution, really. It just drifts into the sunset, and there's not a sunset. That would have actually been pretty, but it's so strange, and it doesn't fit. I really like the ending of The Lobster, but not much I can do with this. The rest of the movie was really great, and even though that the last few minutes were just bland as hell and just left me scratching my head, this movie still gets a 9 out of 10 for me. I definitely have it high on my list for the Oscar nominations, which I may or may not make a video about, especially because it is nominated for Best Picture. I still do enjoy Green Book more than this. But, yeah, thank you for watching this review, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and go see The Favorite. It's very good, and it's being nominated for Best Picture, and I think a bunch of other stuff. So, I'll see you guys in another video. Bye.